what we're going to do now is we're going to start the first of two panels for this afternoon. This one's on veterans transition. So this is veterans speaking to veterans from the heart, and sharing their stories, sharing their experiences. The med tech industry, life sciences in general, can be difficult to get a leg up and get a leg in. What's going to help give you that little bit of a competitive advantage? We're going to hear from veterans that have been there, done that, and now have the button-down shirt to prove it. So they're going to share those stories. And then once that's complete, we'll take another break, and then we'll transition into the hiring panel. And that really gets very far away from the compassion and gets after not just what value do you bring from the character, your character as a veteran, but also value in the terms of results for the organization that will help get you and give you that competitive advantage. And that's going to be a very interesting discussion with hiring managers and as well as recruiters. So that being said, please introduce yourself, where you're from, your branch of service, what military specialty, and the company, just so everyone understands who you're representing. So go ahead, Zach.
Zach Yaffe. So I actually grew up here in Cambridge, Massachusetts. I commissioned out of the Naval Academy. I did just over 6 years as a surface warfare officer, so 4 years out of Mayport, Florida, and the last 2 on Admiral staff out in Hawaii, which, if you have the choice, I would highly recommend Hawaii over Florida. I left the service in 2013. I actually went to business school. I decided I wanted to get into the life sciences business because I wanted to stay in the Boston area. I wanted to get back, and this seemed to be the industry to do it. After school, I graduated, went to work for Biogen. So I worked there for a couple roles for a few years, doing originally in supply chain operations and then moving into kind of a niche area, which I do now, which is supply chain security. So counterfeiting, theft, and diversion, and preventing them from our products here at Vertex Pharmaceuticals, which is right out the window if you can, we move the screen.
Awesome.
I'm Brian Brown. I'm from Pittsburgh, so I'm stuck living amongst Pats fans, which has been new to me. I was an 0311 infantryman, enlisted in the Marine Corps, got out in 2014, went to Ohio State for world politics and minored in Russian. Don't use either of those at all. Graduated in 2017, got a job offer with Oracle. That's how I ended up in Boston doing business development for Oracle. Wanted to get into the medical device industry. Happened to be able to get to do that through Mike Pettit, who was here earlier in a veterans group meetup that he does. Met my business partner, Derek Daly, who you'll hear from later, and was able to come into the medical device industry from Minitronics Medical, who is an integrated contract design and manufacturer of medical devices that have an electric and software component out of St. Paul, Minnesota. I'm in the East Coast doing business development for them.
Hello, everyone. Charles Eckert from Buffalo, New York, probably the furthest north, right, in this area, but I'm a Buffalo Bills fan. Joined the Marine Corps, enlisted in 2013, did 4 years, was stationed out in Okinawa, Japan for my enlistment, was a 3432 dispersing, so I worked predominantly in an office with logistics. Moved back, went to Penn State World Campus overseas. Their online program is quite incredible, especially for veterans. And moved back to the Philadelphia area to go to school on campus back in December 2017. Currently at Penn State Abington, finishing in August. And I work for Neuronetics, a neuromodular device company in Malvern, PA, as a financial analyst.
I got in '98, when most of you were born, give or take. Commissioned out of the Naval Academy, did 8 years in the United States Marine Corps as an artillery officer. During that time, very little artillery, light armor reconnaissance, and some provisional infantry over in the sandbox. Came out and immediately went to work where I am now at Stryker Orthopedics in Mahwah, New Jersey. No preference on football teams, so they're all equally not good. And now working in marketing as a product lifecycle management and portfolio management director.
So if you feel old, I feel even older. I graduated from West Point in 1989, and I served as an armor officer during Operation Desert Storm. And I was a platoon leader, and I learned a lot as an armor officer. I met General Franks. We were talking about him earlier. Thanks to all the veterans in the room. Appreciate all you've done for the country. Service is really important. So out of the Army, what I did was I worked at Nalco Chemical Company for 10 years. I have an engineering degree, and they hired basically sales reps. They took engineers and trained them to be sales reps. Right, so I got out of that, and then I went to GE Medical. I worked at GE Medical for a couple years, and I've been with Abiomed for about 14 years. I started in 2005. So what I do is physician program director. So I travel the Northeast, and I set up educational events. We had one here last night at BI Deaconess, which was a good reason to participate in today's conference. I live in Westchester, PA, so right down the road from you. I have 3 kids and a wife and a dog. And really looking forward to participating in today's conference. Thanks.
I am Charles Whitfield. I was in the Navy for 26 years, so you just got me barely beat. So you get the title. But I'm a Miami Dolphins fan, so I'm really out of place up here. Maybe not quite as bad as Buffalo, though. I know. So I came in as an engineer. Enlisted as an engineer back in '92. Went through that for a little bit, about 6 years, and then I went recruiting through the Navy and absolutely fell in love with the talent acquisition piece of it and did that for about 20 years. So retired, got hired on with Smith & Nephew, just a tremendous opportunity. I think the thing that ultimately sealed the deal for me was, I think all of us, and you've hit the nail on the head, Jason, is that I think everybody in this room wants to be a part of, continue to be a part of something that's bigger than themselves, something that does and raise the bar for the people around them. And I think this industry certainly achieves that. So I get a great deal of satisfaction out of it. And I'm kind of unique in the fact that not only did I transition, but I transitioned into a talent acquisition role, which is kind of unique for me. So I see the good, I see the bad. I can give a lot of people a lot of perspective on both sides of that, from a personal piece and also from a screening and hiring manager piece. So I really look forward, appreciate the venue, Jason, to connect with other veterans and continue to help other people out. So thank you.
Great, thanks. You're also, I guess, serve as the human military occupational specialty computer for Smith & Nephew, given that much time in human resources with the Navy. So good deal. They don't need any translator. They've got you. Right. So good deal. So thank you all to our panelists. So the first question I'll tee up, and we'll start with Charles. What did your military occupational specialty compare to the career you find yourself in now? I know you kind of started down that same road, but you also shared with us a little bit that there's differences between the two. So, I know from being a tank commander to director for physicians programs is a big leap. So if you want to further expand on, hey, these are some of the skills that included help me with that transition process in the specialties, please feel free to add that in too.
I was very fortunate in Navy. When you're on a recruiting assignment, it's kind of unique in the fact that you're really you're in that middle land where you're bridging the gap between the civilian sector and the military sector. So you can already become versed in speaking both languages. So obviously that kind of carries over, and not being frontline and being removed from putting warheads on foreheads certainly makes a difference too. So that part of it's easy. I think the thing that everybody possesses being a veteran, and the things that translate the easiest, is leadership. And I think it's there's so much that's encompassed under that, whether it's ethics, decision-making ability, ownership of the process, the ability to collaborate, and I think overall just an operational mindset. I think that's unique a lot of times to what we do, and maybe more so sometimes in the HR aspect, because I don't think there's a lot of true operational mindset. So I think that combination of abilities that, we all have a mission in the military. We know what that is. It's our job to execute that mission. Let the team celebrate the success when we do, and take ownership if we don't, right? That's the mantle of leadership that we have. So I think that piece of it is rare, and I think when you can leverage that in a way that adds value to a company, it's a good, it's a good thing. So I'd say, yeah, we were talking about it, I and Pat were talking about, it's like, hey, how does it really relate? Well, it does, but it doesn't, because there's a lot of things on the civilian side. There's compliance issues. There's, things that kind of are baked in, and we have our own language. Everybody has their own language. So there are some nuances, but I think the thing that's quintessential and timeless is leadership and those soft skills and taking care of your people wherever you go, and that advocacy for them. And I think truly more than anything else, that's probably what's allowed me to get the most out of my team where I'm at now. It wasn't my knowledge of civilian recruiting or anything else, but it was simply removing the obstacles and barriers for them and letting them, getting stuff out of their way so they could do their job. And I think that's ingrained in most everybody in this room from day one. So to me, that's the biggest skill that probably made that transition easy for me.
Thanks, Charles. Steve?
Yeah, I mean, just building on what Charles said, I would agree. I was a tanker, so what I was trained to do was to blow things up in mass quantities, and we were pretty good at it, if I say so myself. But I would say the thing that's translated to the civilian world is really just what Charles said, is leadership, right? Is leading by example, is ethics and morality. It's taking care of people, demonstrating that you're credible, doing homework, being on time, being organized. All the basic things that you learned in high school and college and in the military, translate well to, just about any part of the civilian world. So I would agree, leadership and, some of the basics of establishing credibility with people.
Yeah, I won't go through the laundry list of the basics of it, but I think the thing you said last, which I liked a lot, was the being on time, the things that we took for granted in the military, which is, this is what I do every single day, because if I don't, there is no if I don't. I do this every single day. I'm on time. I look appropriate. I'm addressing people in a respectful manner, those kinds of things. Those are a lot rarer in the civilian world than you would probably think. And just being able to translate that on top of the leadership, on top of the integrity, those are kind of what you expect, although they're not everywhere, unfortunately. But those little things in the military really helped transition because it made you more likable. And so that's one less, and more respected. And that's really one less obstacle to overcome in a transition from going from civilian, or from military to civilian.
Thanks, Drew. Charles?
I think teamwork was probably one of the biggest things for me. Working in a group environment and building that leadership, learning from those people that are both above, below, and next to you was really an amazing experience. And as you move into the private sector, you don't necessarily always know if your boss has your best interest at heart. But especially in the military, it's you take care of your own, and you're there for your brother and sister.
Coming from Marine enlisted infantry, I had to learn how to read first when I got out, so that was probably. But outside of that, yeah, that's just things people take for granted. But doing business development and sales, I think the biggest thing coming from the infantry for me was it's the most competitive environment I've ever been in 24/7. Sales is just as competitive. I could work an 8-hour day and technically have done my job, but is that really going to make me good at my job? And also knowing, too, that I have to do my job. In the infantry, I did my job because it was my job. I didn't have to like everything. No one liked getting up at 4 to just walk 20 miles. No one liked it, but it was my job. And there's things I do in my job that I might not like it, but I know it's my job. And I know that you talked about letting people down. In sales, you're bringing your company in money to keep people employed. And if you don't do that, you've let a lot of people down. So, going off what you said, but then for me, the competition in college, too, is huge. My friends from my platoon that were in college, we talked, what's your GPA, 3.6? I was like, well, I don't have a 3.6, but I'm going to just graduate before you, so then I have an excuse why I didn't have a 3.6 because I finished in 2 years. You took 4 years. So competition's been huge for me, probably the biggest thing, I think, for me in work, college, and that came from the infantry.
So everyone said great things, so this is tough to follow up. But I would say, just because I have to say something, right? So it would be dealing with stress. It's amazing how much sometimes you take for granted how much you deal with stress on a routine basis and how that's not always the case with everybody. And just making decisions without all the information, right? It's something that I think you get used to doing in the military. You kind of make the best decision of what you have, and that's as applicable in the business world. Absolutely.
Okay, so I'm going to surmise with some maybe keywords that may or may not help a resume if they're not on yours already. Obviously, leadership, operational mindset, taking care of people, maybe not so much, maybe delivering results that your people are part of that process. Ethics, timeliness, interpersonal skills, collaboration, competitive, maybe a competitive advantage, and problem solving, conflict resolution, as you want to look at it from a stress standpoint. All absolutely key, great points that you all brought out. And I think as we talked about early in the opening, you look at all those soft skills. Some of those we may take for granted as veterans, but it's exactly, there may be enough MDs. I know some have JDs out there. There may be enough JDs and MDs and white lab coats out there, but none of those function without that first thing that Charles and Steve talked about, which was leadership. Someone's got to chart the course. Someone's got to plot the azimuth and say, this is the direction we're going in, together as an organization and as a company. You can't learn that in a university. We learn that through the crucible of tough, realistic military training, and for the majority in the room, through hard knocks and in conflict zones across the world, whether that be Kuwait, Somalia, Iraq, or Afghanistan, for veterans that have participated in those conflicts. And so that don't sell yourself short. At the hiring panel, what I throw out to those in the audience is, now prepare yourself to ask questions at the hiring panel. How do I communicate that to the interview folks? How do I get in a 15 or 20 second clip, if you will, a soundbite that shows that I'm a greater competitive advantage than the guy before or gal after me for that position that you're competing for? This is great, but how do you translate that into value about you and put that into the company? And think about that as we go forward. The next question, and we'll start with Zach, is what was the most challenging part of your transition into biotech?
Sure. So, I mean, I'll be honest, like so many of the key jobs in this company, in any of these companies that keep the company running, I had no idea what they even were. I mean, you kind of have these vague ideas of maybe these guys do something and they make this, but it's so much just learning the business, learning how important so many aspects you had no idea what they were. And I think part of the transition challenge maybe is just you're so used to kind of people accepting decisions and moving forward with them, and that's not always the case sometimes in the civilian world, and kind of readdressing and kind of re-understanding where you fit and kind of how you want to manage both upward and downward and kind of how you fit in a less of a necessarily structured environment.
For me, it is a similar thing coming. I was originally doing business development for Oracle, so when I came over to medical device manufacturing, I didn't have the medical background or an engineering tech background. So trying to learn both those things and separate it was the hardest part for me. I mean, just learning acronyms, leaving meetings, was that a medical term? Was that an engineering term? That was very hard for me. And then learning that as a remote employee, one of the first times in my life I didn't have a structured in-person training, whether college classes, Marine Corps, prac app type things, but tie it back to the mission accomplishment type thing is, we as veterans take things like that and it's like, well, this is new to me and I don't know it, but then it would never be okay to show up and say, hey, I couldn't figure it out, I don't know. So just being like, I guess it's going to be a 10-hour day because I have to learn this. So tying it back into one of the traits that we might take for granted that other people don't.
For me, it would be confidence and humility, finding that happy medium. I say that with going back to school, sitting in class and not necessarily feeling like, it's an ego check for sure, because, you're a little bit older than, your counterparts or your fellow students. The humility fact of being that that's where you should be, because you're learning, you're taking in information, you're studying, and you know, although you worked your way up in the in the military in whatever role you were in, it's the humility to know that you're just getting started, and you're moving into a whole different sector. So there's so much to learn, and there's so much information that you need to find out.
I failed miserably on the humility piece going into it. It's funny. Came out of the Marine Corps, was still active duty when I started my job, so there was no transition. And so I walked in, and on my first day, I got called by my first name and was told no by someone that worked for me. And for those of you that have served, that's a mind-blowing experience if you haven't had that happen to you before, for someone that's not in your family. So, and realized much later on that I was wrong, that the no was correct, but that I don't have instant credibility because I'm not an expert in my field. And I just said, ready, set, go. Why are we not all going in this direction? And having the patience to know that slowing it down and bring everybody along with you for the ride, and yeah, you may learn something along the way. It took me a while to pick up.
Yeah, those are all good points. I would say, for me, I had already worked in the civilian world for 10 years before I moved into medtech. So I had sales experience and I had an engineering background, but I did not have any medical device experience. So I distinctly remember interviewing at GE because there were 10 interviews, and everybody gave me the green light except for the guy who was going to be my boss. And I really needed his support to get that job, right? So he pretty much said, I don't think you can do it. You don't have the experience. You know, thank you very much. So, you know, like you guys had mentioned over here, you know, in the military, no, it was maybe just no for now, or it was a maybe. So just tried to uncover his reasons for not giving me the job and kind of ask questions. You know, what would it take for me to show you that I'm capable? And what he said was, you need to write a business plan to demonstrate that you can learn the technology. So he allowed me the opportunity to write a business plan, and then he gave me the green light to get the job. But there were a couple no's along the way, but the military kind of helped you know, move through some of those obstacles.
Yeah, I came straight, you know, from the military active duty to, you know, the industry too. For me, I think, and my boss is sitting right here, Shelley, so she can probably attest to this. I think it was patience. Someone mentioned this, is that, you know, when I left the Navy, I was an E9, so usually the volume created the desired effect of what I needed to get done. I'm a big believer in ownership. Chief. Yeah, so I'm a big believer in ownership, and you know, we address that in the military by we find out who the owner is, and then we go knee deep, right? And I think what I needed, to your point, was patience. Is that if there were certain things that I thought weren't working the way they needed to, that supported my people or didn't support them, and I think I did the typical Master Chief fashion and went straight at it, when I really should have taken a more collaborative approach, brought those people along, and to your point, learned quite a bit along the way. But I think that was, you know, and it goes to humility to a certain extent, is that, you know, depending what level, you know, you leave at, or, you know, your rank and charge of when you transition, it makes a big difference. Because even though we'd moved different duty assignments over 26 years, you guys you know, we wear our credibility on our chest and on our collars. So, and then usually have a reputation of procedure, and you don't have that instantly. But so for me, it was definitely patience and understanding that, you know, it takes a village. I mean, you intuitively know those things, but when things just don't happen fast enough, and it's kind of odd, because sometimes in a lot of areas the pace is much faster, and in some areas it's not, which is kind of an interesting piece on the transition too. So you always imagine that corporate America is it's taught, you know, it's state-of-the-art technology, everything's organized, everything's, you know, it's a P&L environment, so they can't have the same kind of frustrations and quagmires that the federal government does. No, they do. No, I mean, it's just different. It's different. It's not quite as holistic as the federal government, I think, a lot of times, but there's definitely opportunity where you're going to be like, wow, I would have never thought this. So I think just kind of understanding that a little bit more and being prepared to deal with that would have been more helpful.
As with a few of the panelists here, I myself jumped right in with both feet 11 months ago. Signed my DD-214 in May and started 30 days later with MVP Vets. Not a lot of transition when you look at a retirement ceremony and moving the family and all that kind of stuff. And so I will strongly echo as you transition, because I know there's 3 out there right now still on active duty. As you transition, give yourself some time and altitude to figure that out. Realize that, yes, some things will speed up faster than others, but the military mentality of I needed 8 of those yesterday, there's probably a time and a place for that in corporate culture, but there are probably not as many of those instances on a daily basis that we probably dealt with when we were in uniform. So you've got to, if you're not a very patient person, you need to identify that and work on that now, or else you're gonna frustrate yourself out of your first job, which is why many veterans within 6 months transition from their first job after they transition. It's because they haven't found the right fit that intrinsically motivates them as well, nor probably show the patience. They've got plenty of grit. You've got you've got a lot of perseverance. You've already shown that. But to understand the operating environment upon which you're going to enter, whether it be a corporate or manufacturing or ops or sales, that's why mentorship and why MVP Vets is here. If you have a question or you don't understand the environment, what did you do? Intelligence preparation of the battlefield or operating environment. Do that now. Take advantage of the program, take advantage of the mentors, and figure that out. So ideally, that first one, if it's not the one, leads to something that is definitely much more meaningful. The second thing I'm just going to hit on there just goes back to lifelong planning and lifelong learning, for that matter. The military does a great job. It's structured from initial entry training, regardless of branch, or if you're an officer and you go through one of the academies or ROTC all the way through. We've got gates and wickets that you will meet every 4 years, and it is programmed out for 23 years. You are about to embark on something completely different. And the key is know what you know what you don't know, and along the way you're going to discover what you didn't know. And you've got to get over that counterintuitive thing I talked about earlier about not being afraid to ask the question, okay? There are people, there are veterans, there are advocates, there are HR professionals, a part of MVP Vets that are here for you to help fill in those knowledge gaps, to make you the best you can and the most competitive you to gain a foothold, if you will, in this industry, because they want your talent and they need your talent. The last question, and we'll wrap this up, is if you could go back in time, and we'll start with Charles, to your transition, which I know isn't that long ago, and you can't use patience or tempo. What's the one piece of advice you wish you would have told yourself?
I would say 2 things, just real quickly. And I got fortunate. I didn't practice this, or it's not because it didn't work out, but I got fortunate. But I would say interview your boss. And by that I mean that you can pick a company or an organization because you believe in them and you believe the culture and everything else, but if your boss isn't aligned with that, it could be a problem for you. And if so, and you could even maybe have a corporation that isn't, maybe not in the top of that, but they have a willingness to rebuild an organization or change the culture. And I think it makes a difference night and day between what kind of experience you would have during that transition period. So I got fortunate. I'm not just saying that because she's here, but I did. But I think it makes a huge difference. I mean, I even, as being in TA, I see even within our organization, the difference in hiring managers and the approach they take with their people, and some are just better than others. I think the second thing I would have totally done different is I kind of made what I call a drug deal with my family, that, hey, as soon as I retire, all this moving around and sacrifice, that's over with. It's about you guys now. Yeah, not really. You know what I mean? I mean, so I would, and I say that, and I say a little bit tongue in cheek, is that, again, very fortunate. But I think if you tend to make a promise to your family, like we're going to move here, or we're going to stay here, or we're not going to do this, or the hours are going to be way better, or I'm not going to be gone anymore, I think you're extremely limiting yourself in your opportunities as far as maybe missing out on the right job for you, and you're going to be trading off, because you're trying to make them happy, because they've made a sacrifice as well. I mean, they've, my wife, God love her, 15 years dragging her around the country, and all the things she's put up with. And I think I felt definitely that I needed to give her something back, but I think maybe I promised too much right off the bat. So I kind of wish I would have kind of limited those, or set the proper expectations with her, that it's really is one more duty station, because you've got to go somewhere, you've got to prove yourself, you've got to put in some hours to do that. You're probably going to have to travel, you're going to have to take on more, to your point, than what's required. And just setting those expectations that I'm going to be on the phone, even if I'm home, I'm going to be working sometimes. But I think just setting that expectation, I would have done a much better job of that.
Yeah, those are good points, Charles. For me, I would say if I had to give myself advice, many years ago, it would have been appreciate the deployment. Because when we got deployed to Operation Desert Storm, I was 23, was newly married, really had no idea what I was doing, because I was brand new to the military. But I would say that there was one experience that I had in the Army that completely changed my life, was getting deployed in a combat zone, because it totally changed my outlook on life, right? To be able to appreciate, living in a free country, having civil liberties, enjoying freedom, enjoying peace, life itself. My whole outlook on life changed as a result of that. And I wouldn't have known that, 30-some years ago. But 30 years looking back, I would say that was the biggest gift that I could have ever gotten, was to serve the country in a combat zone, because it's really helped me throughout my life, right? To be able to deal with stress, to be able to deal with any obstacle. That was probably the best experience that could have happened to a young officer.
Nice. For me, I got lucky with my first company. I realized I'm probably in the minority of I have had 2 jobs, United States Marine Corps, and then my current company. So I was able to find the company that answered my needs, right? For me, it was, I need to feel like I'm helping somebody somewhere. So I got lucky there. So if I hadn't, that would have been the advice I gave. But when I got to it, the advice I wish someone had given me, or that I'd given myself, was take a breath. Right, we came out of 2 combat tours, and then we got deployed for Hurricane Katrina humanitarian relief. And then 6 months later, still active duty, I'm in the civilian world. You're ready to go, ready, fire, aim. I've got half the information I need. Let's go that direction. We're probably going to generally be there by the time it's all over. And most of my transition challenges came from either acting too quickly, speaking too quickly, not just saying, oh, okay, no, I got a better idea. This is going to work a little bit better. It also gives people a chance to talk. You're used to being in command. You're used to going forward and having the good idea and people falling in line behind you. Let's go knock it out. It's going to be great. Taking a breath will save you a lot of problems in your transition, I think.
For me, it was being proud of my service. All right, I was stationed out in Okinawa, Japan. Didn't have the ability to deploy to a combat zone during my enlistment. As a result, when I moved back to Philadelphia, as you see all these people, especially the people in this room. These are all my heroes and the reason why I joined in the first place. And when you first hit the ground running in Philadelphia, or when I first hit the ground running, is that I didn't come to things like this. I didn't network because I felt as though, how can I compare to the person to my left or to my right? And I definitely felt as though now, and me sitting up here, I would never have done this a year ago. So I appreciate it. I've networked a lot in that sphere, and it's being honest with your service and being honest with yourself.
Yeah, mine's very similar to yours. We were talking about it at our table. My biggest problem, even still probably, is long-term planning. When I was in high school, I joined the Marine Corps. The Army has Ranger Regiment. I didn't even know that was a thing, and it's awesome. Air Force has special operations, which I wouldn't have believed if anybody told me that. And then I never had long-term planning, and it's new to me, and I owe it to the guy that helped get me my job, but I always just did. I came home from my first deployment, squad leader school. All right, just do that. Went on my next deployment, what's next? Trial for sniper platoon. And I never thought, well, what's that actually equate to 10 years from now? And then when I went to college, just thought, I'm going to graduate as fast as I can so I can get a job. Well, there's a lot of jobs, and I didn't think about this stuff because I always thought as long as I was doing something, that was good enough. But then it does come back to what is best for you and what's the most beneficial and where you want to be. And I'm starting to learn that now and starting to apply that now. And I owe that through networking with other veterans once again. So that'll be my probably #1 thing to focus on now, and my biggest problem I've had as a high school kid, college kid, Marine, et cetera.
So just be confident. I mean, there's so much in this industry that is, there's some really challenging stuff, right? There's some really smart PhDs, but there's a ton of folks out there who are also working in this that, you know, you be confident. You can learn this stuff. The vast majority of this stuff is very applicable. They've got regulations. You can figure them out. It's, this industry is not beyond anyone's capability, and there's a lot of opportunities in there. So, just have that confidence that you've overcome these challenges before, and you certainly can do that moving forward.
Awesome. Thanks. Thanks to all our panelists. And, I'll just kind of surmise, I think, Charles' point about interviewing your boss, it was a point of me. I'll tell you, I knew coming into this position the minute I stepped through the front door of the organization that my boss worked at, whether the culture, the atmospherics, you've been in units that the minute you step in, you're like, something doesn't look or smell right. I've yet to find an organization in this industry that I wouldn't join. You get that sense when you walk through the doors of those organizations, and we have that training. You know that. You know what a good unit looks like, and you can sense it the minute you walk through the door of any of these organizations. The ones that I've physically gone to and worked with the folks that are on their teams. Appreciate what we got. So whenever you think you're having a bad day in the MedTech device, you can always reflect back and say, look, it ain't really that bad. That helped get me through Ranger School when I was like, I always would tell myself, I wish it would suck more. And then the situation I found myself in really wasn't that bad. Making sure that you satisfy your intrinsic needs and that you're taking a pause to reflect. If you haven't made that leap yet, what I would posit to you is think of this as an offensive operation. You can choose a movement to contact, or you can choose a deliberate attack as your approach to solving the problem. Make it a deliberate plan. See the force, plot out your desired end state, and then establish your objectives, intermediate and long-term, along the way to get you there. And the first step is coming here, and greatly appreciate that. And I think, to end, being honest with yourself and the confidence that you display, your bearing, and I'm not going to speak for the hiring panel, but sometimes your bearing can carry the day. You will prove in your interview process, and I suggest, and someone asked this question at the last event was, who do you think has maybe a little bit more of a competitive advantage going to a panel? Officer, enlisted. And as I thought about it, I said, you know what, I think the enlisted has the advantage. Why? Because that's their system. They police themselves. They go through that process, and they're constantly boarded. They constantly go through interviews to progress to the next rank. Officers, you go to some sort of selection board, in Washington, D.C. or some building, and you don't see the results until they're released. So think about that. But your confidence, regardless of officer or enlisted, your presence, how you carry yourself, and how you treat others can be all the difference in carrying the day. Once you get through ATS, you get through the couple screening calls and whatnot, and you're on the ground, be confident. And I'm sure you'll carry the day. So thanks again. Please join me in a round of applause for our panelists.